Hello, today I'm joined by my guest Emma Parsons from Flatfair. How you doing, Emma?
Lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you with us, and it feels kind of really topical and pertinent because everywhere you look within the lettings industry, somebody somewhere is saying something about the renters' rights, the renters' reforms, the various different bills. Will it? Won't it? Are they making this change? Are they making that change? It's all still to play for,
Oh, where's my
but
crystal ball?
and it's been genuinely really sort of interesting. And I think there's been so much kind of content on this. There's been panels and webinars and blog content written about what we can expect. But I think what we do know for sure is that the direction of travel very much seems to be. That there are a lot of changes afoot. And the one area that I think we can all safely agree on that needs a little bit of a shake-up has been for a while anyway, deposits, because that's something that very much comes up. We are already kind of limited as to how much we can request on a deposit. With pets and everything else getting involved in in all the questions, there's a lot going on. Savvy agents, clever agents, I promise I will let you talk in a minute, but clever agents have long since been looking for a while now at deposit replacement services because they offer a host of protections for both the landlord that make sure that they've got everything that they should have, but it's also a lot more affordable for tenants, and they're very often the ones that are expending all that cash at the beginning of a tenancy. So it feels like we should start the story there, and get on with it. So in a question, the traditional deposit system, why is it unraveling?
You know, what, I think let's be fair to what it is, and it served us well for a very long time. And I think that's the crux of it, is that it's not necessarily broken. It's just that it's very limiting from a landlord perspective and from a tenant perspective. I've been in the industry long enough to remember pre 2008 and pre the deposit legislation, when it was the wild, wild west out there. And, those changes came in and the reform was necessary. But it did bring in the limitations of a 5-week traditional deposit to be held. And I think that puts landlords in a very difficult situation, but also it is very challenging for a tenant to find that bulk of money up front.
It's a lot of cash, isn't it?
A lot of cash, and even the most affluent tenants, moving from property to property, we call it the double deposit conundrum. So we're seeing more and more people continue in rented property as opposed to it being a stopgap.
Yeah.
It tends to be now, you're maybe growing with a property, you're moving from a 2-bed to a family home. And it's quite often that you won't get back your traditional deposit, even if you're getting it back in full, until you've moved into the new one. So therefore, you've got tenants in a situation that they're having to find the first month's rent in advance, which for a family home could be a couple of £1,000, a deposit of another £2,500. They've got their original deposit tied up.
Yeah.
Then all the other associated.
And they've got all the other moving costs. I mean,
Yeah.
and let's face it, every time you move, you end up buying a piece of furniture, an appliance that you need, or just something to make
The
the other
broadband's
place
gone
feel like
up
home.
by another 25% for some reason, even though
That's it.
you've moved down the road. So who has, £4,000, £5,000 knocking around in cash? Like I said, even the most affluent people, it's not that kind of readily available cash. So I think what was needed within the market was something different for tenants, so as that they can keep the ball rolling without getting themselves into debt, without going into an overdraft.
And so for those people who are still kind of in the dark ages, they don't know about how this works. In really simple terms,
Mhm.
I always ask people to explain things to me as if I'm a small child. So humor me. But
Okay.
for those people out there who also need it breaking down for them, how does Flatfair's deposit replacement scheme basically work?
So at the beginning of the tenancy, once the tenants have passed referencing, that being the most important part, because a lot of people think that deposit replacements are for poor quality tenants or for tenants that can't afford things. So once they've passed through referencing under your normal referencing criteria, we send the tenants a choice. Do they want to take a traditional deposit or do they want to take a flat fare, no deposit plan? Really key that it's a choice. And I think
Yeah,
that for the audience listening today, under the tenant fee ban, this cannot be a product that is forced onto tenants. It needs to be ultimately their choice. And they pay a non-refundable fee to flatfare. So it's 28% of the first month's rent, and that's non-refundable. So that's a sunk cost
yeah,
that's not coming off of anything. They don't pay a renewal fee or an admin fee. That's for the life of the tenancy. And then at the end of the tenancy, everything happens as normal. So the checkout's done, the agent compares it, and then rather than doing the negotiation with the tenant directly, they come to Flatfare. And then we submit anything that is deemed owed to the tenant in an invoice form. So a way that we explain it is it's a bit like when you check into a hotel. You check into the hotel, you swipe your credit card, and you're promising to pay for everything that
yeah,
you sneak out of the minibar at the
yeah.
end of your stay. And if you do a
They can
moonlight
hear my
flip,
suitcase clinking. That's
rattling
how they
like a
know.
gun.
Even though I tried to wrap it in the hotel
Oh
towel,
no.
but
Yeah, which they
they know.
also don't like you doing. That's frowned upon. But if you do a moonlight flit, whatever happens, they're going to charge your credit card.
Correct. Yeah.
Whereas if you go down in the morning and check out, they give you an invoice to check over and then you make the payment. Blackbear is exactly the same concept. It doesn't mean that the tenant isn't liable for anything. Flatfare aren't suddenly going to come in on a white horse and save the day. The tenant is paying to not have to find the traditional deposit. They're also benefiting from our end of tenancy service. So we have a dedicated end of tenancy team who review all the charges. They make sure the evidence is there. They make sure that they're fair and just
Yeah.
charges. So the tenant's having that support as well. From in the instances where things do go wrong and a tenant doesn't make the payment where it's owed, that's when Flatfare will step in and purchase the debt. And this is where it becomes very attractive for landlords because, as you said, we can only take 5 weeks for a traditional deposit, whereas Flatfare offers landlords double that amount of protection at the end of the tenancy. And in all honesty, we do that because we are reliant on our landlords to offer this product. So it's not legislated that all landlords have to offer a deposit alternative.
Yeah.
They can choose. So we want to make this the most attractive offering for our landlords as well.
So would it be wrong? I know it's not necessarily an insurance product, but would
Mhm.
it be wrong to sort of compare it to an insurance policy for the landlord at the end of the day? Because if the tenant doesn't play ball,
Yeah.
ultimately Flatfare are there to pick up the pieces.
Yeah, we're a debt purchase business. That is at our essence. We have we have a similar amount of people in our debt recovery team as we do to our sales team. So it is that its essence is what we are. And I think that's really important to touch on because insurance policies with tenants do tend to create a certain type of behavior, which can sometimes not be very endearing. So the difference with Flatfare is that we are not there to clean up after a tenant that's chucked red wine everywhere.
Yeah.
It is very clear that the tenants still must make good their tenancy obligations. And it also means that we can be very flexible. We're also it's not a computer says no approach, as we all know with insurance. Unfortunately, sometimes if you don't tick the right box or use the right color pen, then it can be rather challenging. Whereas we see us much more of an end of tenancy service as
Okay,
opposed to
well,
an
I do want
insurance.
to ask you one or two questions on that, but just so
Mm,
we don't miss any of the details.
of course.
And I know this is your specialist subject, but I want to just ensure that you know that people watching this will fully understand. In terms of the net benefits, then to both the
Mhm.
agents and the landlords who are offering this sort of solution. I mean, it seems obvious to me that you're opening up to a wider pool of people in terms of affordability. It also doubles protection as well. Have I missed anything? Is there anything else that you think an agent should know?
Well, we also pay our agents every time they sell a flatfare plan. So it's a revenue stream, which,
Right.
with the renters' rights bill coming and as we've just discussed, there will be revenue streams which are cut off now. So we don't pay our agents to sell flatfare. We pay our agents to offer flatfare. Our platform is very, very good at presenting flatfare alongside a traditional deposit and giving the tenant all of the information. On top of that, we can also register traditional deposits for our agents, and we
Right.
do that
Okay.
free of charge
You take
for
care of
them.
that sort of admin. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. So in terms of people that are then going to use Flatfare, you mentioned the end of tenancy service, which sounds great in terms of just, I suppose that is an area of quite intense work sometimes post tenancy. Not necessarily the most lucrative work for an agent because they're not being paid necessarily for that bit. So I think we can get all that, we will take all the help we can get. But how do you go about ensuring that, disputes are handled fairly? Because who are you acting for? Are you acting for the tenant? Are you acting for the landlord? It's sort of, I mean, to say that and apologies to both the DPS and the TDS if they're listening to this, but to say that they are completely unbiased and act as an independent, very often we find that the decisions made by both of those services tend to come down on the side of the tenant. The landlord is left fighting with one hand tied behind their back. So we know what the day-to-day reality is for agents. How do you guys ensure that it's as fair as it can be?
We like to we like to think that we are a neutral party. I think, as you said, there are biases and subconscious biases. Look, the deposit legislation is, what's the right word, challenging
Yes.
and sometimes not particularly pragmatic. I think I'm being very diplomatic
Yeah, no,
across all of this.
it's brilliant what you're saying.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and you didn't write the legislation. I didn't write the legislation. Unfortunately, we all have to work within the confines of the legislation. So what Flatbed prides itself on is mirroring a traditional deposit as closely as possible. Our team in end of tenancy are fully versed in the deposit legislation. So our aim is to reach a conclusion as quickly as possible because that's what everybody wants.
That is true.
Nobody wants to be hanging around. So we try to cut to the bad stuff as quickly as possible. There's no point in dragging it out. If an agent is submitting charges to us, that from a landlord perspective, I can totally get what they're submitting charges for. It seems sensible. There's a mark on the carpet, and the mark on the carpet wasn't there 2 years ago. Why is it the landlord's problem that
Yeah.
there's now a
Yeah.
mark on the carpet? I want to charge to replace the carpet. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Landlord, you're not going to get the cost of the whole carpet. This is what you're going to get. So we try to cut to those conversations really, really quickly, which I think is what agents appreciate. No one likes conflict. No one likes confrontation. And I think by it coming from a third neutral party like Flatfare, and giving the evidence, we have very good AI tools that can provide detail to the legislation, provide the approximate costing as to how much you should be able to claim for that instance. And we just start that negotiation really, really quickly. And it's trying, our aim is to reach a conclusion that everybody is comfortable with as quickly as possible. If we can't, we've got a panel of 4 independent TDS adjudicators that flatfair pays. The tenant doesn't pay for adjudication, the landlord doesn't pay for adjudication, the agent doesn't. We try to do everything we can to stop it from getting to adjudication, because ultimately, if we can get a negotiated settlement beforehand, it's quicker, it's often fairer in terms of how everybody feels about it.
Everyone's just flipping a coin with adjudication, aren't they, effectively?
It's very, very black and white. I think that's the key bit. And a lot of the training and support that we do is not just around offering a deposit alternative. And I think this is the difference with flatfair. For a lot of our competitors, it's an insurance product. It's a way for tenants not to have to find a traditional deposit. Whereas we are very much that end-to-end service. I see us as slotting in between the references being passed and the contract being signed. We can deal with the deposit alternative and your traditional deposit. And in the end, it's very much a collaborative end of tenancy service for our partners.
Okay, so I'm sold. Show me where to sign. But before I do, I need to build trust with obviously the people that I'm working with, both tenants, landlords. So is there an education piece that kind of needs to go out there? How's the best way to get that across to people?
I think from a tenant perspective, tenants are much more open to it. And I think from a tenant perspective, they are very much guided by their letting agent. You know, for a lot of people, that it's very green. They've never gone through the process. We have a lot of resources that are directed at tenants and the information. We are very black and white with tenants. We never want to have a tenant coming back to us going, I feel like I was missold this. You know, if we ever have that, it's a very quick, right, let's exit you from this as quickly as possible. From our agent point of view, it's absolutely about building landlord trust in this product. Now, we've been around for nearly 8 years. Deposit alternatives are coming up for 10 years.
Yeah.
If I get told this is newfangled nonsense at least once a week.
Okay. But it is well tested, isn't it?
It's really hugely well tested. But, you know, this wizardry and witchcraft that we are doing, you know, I think a lot of our work at the beginning with our agents is about building their confidence in talking about it. So we spend a lot of our onboarding not about talking to tenants, it's about talking to their landlords about it. Flatfair sells itself to tenants. That's not a problem. It's about landlords relinquishing that pot of cash.
They need to know that there is another way. And I think most of them are coming to this entirely uneducated. And I mean that in the nicest possible way.
Yes,
it's not
absolutely.
They just don't know that another way exists. And if you can give them an option that effectively doubles their cover, then they start to lean forward and listen at that point, is my experience anyway. But particularly with the renters' rights bill coming up, they will want to know, you know, are these changes going to mean that we are being disadvantaged? There's a piece to do with your landlords there, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think, you know, the amount that they're able to hold is continually being squeezed. Is 5 weeks enough? Like, really, to be able to deal with an unknown end of tenancy date? You know, you could have a tenant in there for 4 weeks, or you could have a tenant in there for 4 years. You know, I think that for landlords, there's so much uncertainty at the moment and so many unknowns that what flatfair does is gives them an extra level of comfort. We can't predict end of tenancy behaviour. Nobody can. I've seen the most beautiful reference reports come through over the years and then be the worst tenants. And I've seen the most awful reference reports and then be the most beautiful tenants. So, it's being a landlord has a level of uncertainty. All that landlords can do is utilize the tools and products that are around to be able to kind of protect themselves from those uncertainties at the moment. And that's what Flatfair does. It complements really well with rent and legal protection. If you've got rent and legal, cover your arrears with rent and legal. A lot of the companies are now doing zero excess on the rent and legal protection. And then you've got 10 weeks damages and dilapidations with Flatfair, which you didn't pay anything for. Why wouldn't you?
You're rightly so very enthusiastic about it, and it sounds like there is a bit of a reward in almost like it levels the playing field a little bit. It allows tenants to move more cheaply, I suppose, and we all know that cash flow is important. It increases protection for the landlords. It adds to an agent's bottom line, so it's win 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 all over the place. Is that the most rewarding thing about working for Flatfare?
Oh,
What makes you jump up in the morning and go,
what, woohoo! Look, I was working in agency for many, many years. I mean, I don't look old enough, but I've been in agency since 2003. So, I was ready to leave agency. And when Flatfare came along, it was the perfect segue of moving into a different type of business, but staying in property. And I think that what Flatfare is doing is, we're trying to change everything one tenancy at a time. And it is challenging. And there are some days where you think, oh God, just isn't going to get through to people, but I think that winning those challenges and changing agent mindsets and landlord mindsets, and then also seeing them come through the other end 12, 18 months later, when you've got a howler of a checkout and actually they've been able to sit down with the
yeah,
landlord and go, great news.
yeah.
We wouldn't have been able to do this if we'd have had a traditional deposit. That's where you kind of go, yeah, okay, they get it. They get it.
That's lovely. And whilst you've got your magic wand out, if there
Mm.
is something that you could change about the rental market, other than maybe take that renters' rights bill and burn it, but other than that, what would the one thing be? If you had one thing in your gift, what would you
Do you
change?
know what it was? And this may be an unpopular opinion, and I say it in a way of I I would welcome licensing for agents. And the reason why is not because I think we need any more red tape to jump around, but I find it so frustrating that agents don't get their value or don't promote their expertise and their value, and that they're not viewed as a professional service. I think it's absolutely horrendous how, in the time that I've been in the industry, fully managed fees just keep on dropping and dropping
Yeah,
and dropping.
yeah.
And I just think there's no other professional service around housing that you would go in and negotiate the fee.
It's true. So there is that perception, isn't there, that if
Mm.
we formalize the qualification, if there's it's a necessity, you need to use a licensed agent, then there would be a little bit of respect that goes along with it. In much the same way you wouldn't just go and see a doctor that hasn't got a qualification.
Or a conveyancer to sell
Yeah,
your house, and I think that's the thing. I think I'm continually talking to agents, and I always like to, big up a valuer or a lister, say, look, come on, you're the expert. You've been asked to come out by this landlord because you have the skill set. You're the one that knows your stuff. You know the 136 pieces of legislation that need to be ticked off before you can let this property. Go in there and own
we
yourself.
used to be able to stick them all on one sheet of A4.
We did.
We can't do it anymore.
We can't.
We can't do that.
Mine was gas and cash. As long as you had those two, you're fine, off you go. But that was 20 years ago. We're not allowed to do that
Well,
anymore, quite rightly.
Emma, this has been truly fascinating, and there's a lot there for agents to sort of take away and work out where they can
Mm.
work this in. I think you're lovely, approachable people. We see you at all the different conferences, great merch as well, but
Me
they are
too.
genuinely got a great solution, and trusted by lots and lots of agents. And one statistic we always ask for stats to try and make something stand out. But one statistic that kind of caught my eye was because you start this whole process by saying we offer the tenant a choice. They can either go traditional deposit or they can use flatfair. And over 50% of the tenants, when left to make that choice on their own, choose flatfair. Now that's significant, isn't it? Because they get the benefits. Like you say, it's not really the tenants necessarily that need selling to on this. It's the landlords that need that education, and I suppose the confidence building a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, we look, if we could sell to 50% of the tenants in the country on every tenancy, I would be doing this interview from sunnier climes. This is we are interested in spreading the deposit alternative word. There is enough tenants out there for the group of deposit alternative companies that if we are converting 50% of tenancies, we will all be in a very happy place. So I think it's, like I said, it's less about tenants understand the benefits. We're very slick at our approach. It's more about building confidence, building trust with landlords and agents to make this a more normalized product.
Well, Emma Parsons, Sales and Partnerships Director at Flatfair, to give you your full title. Thank you so much for your time. And I highly recommend that people reach out and get in touch. It doesn't hurt, and I think it can it's actually going to help add to people's bottom lines, but also offer your clients that essential protection. Thank you very much, Emma.
Thank you, David.